Everybody, we're just letting our Zoomers in. And it's nice to see you live or Zoomish. I can almost share the screen here. You'll see me for literally a couple of minutes only, and then we will move on to the main event. Just gonna, so while our audio outsiders connect, it's great to see everyone back here for the 7th week of the History of Material Text, 7th, 8th, something like that. Good question. It's that time of the semester, but I know that we have 5 to go, so we're right in the thick of things. Mostly old friends tonight, but if there are new faces and folks, we're sending around a sign-in sheet as we do every week. Put your email down in nice clear letters so we can get you on our listserv, which we will not overload you with. There's too much email for all of us, I know, but that is how we keep in touch about future seminar meetings, which you're, of course, always welcome to attend in person here in the Kislak Center or online via Zoom. If you don't know me, I'm John Pollack. I'm one of the co-organizers. I am here with Zach Lesser from the Department of English and Jerry Singerman, Emeritus Humanities Editor from the Penn Press. It's a good early Americanist turnout tonight. Happy to see that. We're one of the faithful. And are there any other announcements of upcoming things that we should be telling the world about? There are many upcoming things, but we're gonna. I almost said we're gonna go postal tonight. We're not gonna do that. We're gonna do it in a different sense. No, it is really fun and a pleasure for us to welcome back Christy Pottroff and this tonight to the front of the house. Christy, as I know some of you know, is a longtime friend of and participant in this seminar, and really glad to have her with us after some delays. Christy is assistant professor of English at Boston College. She has her PhD from Fordham.
Yes, that's right.
And as some of you will recall, we first got to know Christy here during her time as something called an Early American Material Text Fellow that some of you will remember what those are. Very interesting program co-sponsored by the Library Company and the McNeil Center. That was in 2016 or thereabouts. She was then a full-fledged McNeil Center Fellow in the following year and was here with us maybe after that. I can't, the time is all a little blurry as we all know. Some of you will also recall that back in the all Zoom days of April 2020, Christy gave a short presentation with the intriguing title Anne Bradstreet's Door. So ask her for more info on that if you'd like. It may still be out there on YouTube somewhere. And Christy has worked on really a panoply of 18th and 19th century American figures, Harriet Jacobs, Walt Whitman, Royal Tyler, and she has a new piece coming out on Phyllis Wheatley Peters, which I'm very much looking forward to. But let's turn to tonight's topic. Our institution, the one we're sitting in now, is, as Christy knows very well, was actually founded by a postmaster, or a deputy postmaster to be more precise. That's Benjamin Franklin. Nowadays, I think, perhaps I don't speak for all of us, but that the post office is perhaps an institution we love to hate. And apparently it always was, as it still is, kind of a political punching bag. Christy has a recent and really wonderful article on Franklin as postmaster. And one of its opening sentences is, the Philadelphia post office was a mess when Franklin took over in 1737. I wish we could say that things have changed. I myself am desperately and futilely searching for a package from France that has never arrived. so that's a double curse when La Poste and the USPS must somehow work together or not. Two infamous bureaucracies always being better than one. I think we all probably have some stories like that. Now, I will say on the good side, I confess I always loved the old, now gone 24-hour window at 30th Street Station where you could mail something any day, any time of day. It really felt like your package or letter was going somewhere when you brought it there. So, but I digress, sorry. In this article, which appeared in the 2022 volume Intermediate Horizons, Book History and Digital Humanities, Christy has decoded in really marvelous detail Franklin's postal account ledgers, which are held at the American Philosophical Society. They were very well known, but very rarely investigated, and she's really decoded them. Franklin, she reveals, was a highly skilled information manager, her phrase, and as she argues in that article, post office books offer a less abstracted way to understand long-standing debates about the circulation of print and the formation of translocal communities in early America. That's a powerful claim. Behind these ledgers, she goes on to demonstrate our stories, narratives that made their way into the Pennsylvania Gazette and many other places. They are, as she calls them, a circulatory system that preserves information, but also, she argues, displaces it in an era of increasing colonial control. So, to answer a question you might have, Ben Franklin did read other people's mail. I'm really looking forward to what I believe will be tonight another important chapter in Christie's account of information control and the postal system of early North America. Her talk is entitled Mary Katherine Goddard, Postal Hacker, and we're happy to have you, Christy. Welcome. There's a giant document on this table that will make an appearance later.
All right. So first, well, I guess the real first, I am such a cheerleader for the U.S. Postal Service. I would add, I think that it serves still a very important role in keeping people informed, offering other public services as well. So I'm going to be very critical of the post office tonight, but I think today it still is an important institution. And then second, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I especially want to thank the coordinators of this workshop series, John Pollock, Jerry Singerman, Zach Lesser, and Lila Goldenberg for bringing me here and for opening up this space to me. This workshop series has been informing my thinking for many years now. So I'm really grateful to be presenting here, and I feel quite honored, in fact, so thank you. I'm also grateful for the enduring support of several people in this room, Wayne Bodel, especially for being such a cheerleader when I was working on this dissertation, for being a wealth of knowledge and generosity, and for sending really good care packages in the mail. I also want to thank Emma Hart for being here, for modeling how to make early American community in Philadelphia. I've always felt welcomed here, and I'm really just grateful to be reconnecting here in this space. And I'm also just grateful to have other friends in this room. Boyda Johnston made the trip here from New York City. I have a former professor from Kansas State University, Katie Carlin, in the room.
So this,
yes, Wildcat. And thank you to people who are here on Zoom as well. It's been a very big year for me. As a lot of you know, I was diagnosed with and treated for cancer, and that I was originally scheduled to present last year on 2 different occasions and just kept having to delay. I was worried that it could have been cancer at the beginning, and then it turned out it was. Thankfully, I'm cancer-free today. I'm feeling healthy, but yeah, thank you. But it teaches you a lot, you know, and I think that one of the things that I'm just the most grateful for is just the support of everyone here, for the support of my family, for the support of my partner, Laura, and just it just really, really does feel so good to be back, to be able to be thinking with my mind. I've been so much, you know, a healing, you know, kind of body over this last year. So it just means a lot to just kind of be able to kind of get lost in the weeds of ideas and thinking and research. So thank you to everyone else for being here as well. And then I also want to particularly thank for the help on this chapter, my solidarity writing group at Boston College. So Jess Pauchek, Giovanna Jones, and Eddie Bonilla, who gave me feedback on this chapter and kind of helped me frame the talk for this event. So So that's all my thank yous. As John had suggested, I've been thinking about the US postal system, the early American postal systems, for a long time now. It's been about 10 years, a whole decade since I started my dissertation on the topic. And my dissertation really celebrated the democratic effects of the postal system and postal incorporation. And it considered the ways the postal system as a public institution facilitated the widespread distribution of 19th century American literature. It celebrated the best parts of the US postal system in the 19th century as an institution that could form community through the circulation of texts and abet the careers of authors who had fewer resources. And the post office certainly did do that. But what I've come to learn from further and deeper reading in the archive is that postal officials really only sought to foster certain kinds of community. The US mail was primarily designed to facilitate the political discourse of white men and to provide the infrastructure for economic exchange. So it really was about setting up channels for sending money in a safe way, kind of before banks, before US currency. After reading literally thousands of pages from the letter books of the Postmaster General, so the kind of equivalent of a 19th century outbox, I just really knew I needed to write a different book because from that archive, I could see a system that was very security obsessed, that would, people would get really afraid if the wrong kinds of people were getting close to the mail. So I'm writing a different kind of book that really does kind of look at kind of takes seriously the postal system's exclusions and puts them at the center and thinks about what that can teach us as well about the kind of more common narrative about the US postal system in the 19th century. So the book that this is coming from, Postal Hackers, tells the stories of the misfits who hacked the US postal system by using mail tools and protocols in unexpected ways. It centers the experiences of people of color and of unmarried white women. So those are my misfits. So the people who the postal system would not employ and the people who they were not inclined to serve. So, but in looking in the archive and just kind of knowing how culture works, people still use the postal system anyway, even though it wasn't designed for their use. So on the one hand, Postal Hackers exposes the white supremacist, capitalistic, militaristic, and patriarchal allegiances of the US Post Office Department in its first century. And it also draws together a dozen extraordinary episodes in which misfits reappropriate the postmaster's tools, not to defeat the system outright, but to work alongside and across and outside of it in pursuits of a more human scale. This research was first inspired by Harriet Jacobs and her use of the US mail that's described in her autobiography, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. So if it's been a while since you've read that, I'll kind of remind you of the scene. So she was determined to escape plantation violence, but unwilling to leave her children behind. So she carved out what she describes as a loophole of retreat, spending over 7 years hiding in her grandmother's tiny attic crawl space. So from this space, she develops a plan using the Postal Service to convince her enslavers that she had ran away to northern cities. She writes letters to her grandmother from the crawl space, purportedly from Boston and New York City, and then passes them by hand out the window to a sailor friend who then takes them up to New York City and Boston and puts them in the mail there. According to postal policy, they would bear a postmark from those places, and it was enough to convince her enslaver that she had escaped to the north. And in fact, he indeed travels to both Boston and New York to seek her out, even though she remains in hiding very, very close by. And it turns out Jacobs wasn't really alone in these kind of unauthorized and hacking uses of the US mail. So the project starts with the establishment of the US Post Office Department at the end of the 18th century and considers what Mary Katherine Goddard's dismissal can teach us about the transition from the Revolutionary era postal system, where Franklin kind of ruled the roost in some ways. And so the transition from that to the Post Office Department that really kind of shut down her career. So I'll talk about her story in a lot of detail in a few minutes, but I'll tell you a little bit more about the book. The book continues by reviving the circumstances that informed an 1802 racial exclusionary law that in which no other than a free white person could work for the mail or even legally handle a US mail bag. While scholars have interpreted this law as a response to the Haitian Revolution, it was just as much informed by domestic events in which Maroon communities disrupted mail delivery, intercepted US mail bags, and made use of the contents. The project also tells the story of Helen Jewett, a New York City-based sex worker who used the urban drop mail system to solicit and communicate with her clientele. So through this constellation of stories, we can better understand both the prohibitions and the possibilities of the US mail in the 19th century. So the book considers hacking of all sorts and plays Rolodex with the term's various usages to draw to the surface the material registers through which these misfits interacted with the US Post Office Department. So I'm interested in hacking as in gaining unauthorized use, what we're thinking about today, what we think about maybe more commonly today in a digital world. But I'm just as interested in moments where we see people like hacking the mail, as in like chopping and breaking and disrupting a line. I'm also interested in hack as a noun, so like a lackey or a drudge, a writer with a workaday approach to the literary, so someone would call a hack. Often I'm finding cases where they're using the post office in curious ways as well. So taken together, these stories help measure the particular nature of postal authority, the mercantile allegiances of the Post Office Department, as well as the social and literary effects of postal incorporation. But more than anything else, the book is a celebration of misfit ingenuity, abetted by the creative reuse of tools and protocols made commonplace by the US Post Office Department. So today, I'm going to share a chapter, a portion of a chapter, the first chapter of the book, about Mary Katherine Goddard, the Revolutionary era postmistress from Baltimore, who was fired in 1789 for being a woman. The new Postmaster General, Samuel Osgood, believed that the position would require more travel and managerial work than a woman could undertake. But before we go there, I need you to forget everything you know about the USPS today. The postal system we have inherited bears little resemblance to what was going on in the 1790s. Forget the uniform, the standardized architecture of the post office, forget the mail truck, the blue corner mailbox, even forget stamps and envelopes. Those didn't exist yet, and all of that would come later in the middle decades of the 19th century. So moreover, the early national postal system in the 1790s was no longer the colonial network of Franklin here. So I'll talk a little bit more about that transition, but it was really changing to grow with the expanding nation. And Mary Katherine Goddard's dismissal coincides with the advent of the early national system that's best chronicled by historian Richard John. The new postal system was designed to incorporate every town and city in the new nation to provide the infrastructure for representative democracy, connecting constituencies with their elected officials in Washington, D.C. It was also designed to provide the safe passage of banknotes over long distance and to a lesser extent, really, the distribution of newspapers and other print. When the mail bag was full of money, they just threw the newspapers out. So you can really see where the priorities are when you see what actually gets delivered. According to Richard John, in one sense, the post office created a new kind of community, and it helped foster an inclusive national community of knowledgeable citizens. But he recognizes in the very process of incorporating the citizenry into American public life, postal policy marginalized a number of groups, in particular women and Black people. And in this way, the public sphere identified the public sphere with free white men, the most privileged class of Americans at that time. It was a John quote. And this project really kind of puts those exclusions at the center. And so just to give you a little bit more to kind of think about in the 1790s, I think in some respects, the US Post Office Department of the 1790s can best be understood just as a network of men who worked in tandem with one another to just kind of move mail between one another, according to post office law and under the direction of the Postmaster General. Oftentimes, these postmasters offered services from their homes or other businesses. This was not a period when the post office was a standalone kind of public access building. And by contrast, if we're kind of thinking about the employment structures of the US Post Office Department, their only official employees were these deputy postmasters and the staff at the Central Post Office in DC. and the stagecoach drivers and the post riders who were delivering the mail were considered private contractors, and in fact, the very mail bags entrusted to stagecoach drivers and post riders were locked against them, and only postmasters had the key. So now to Mary Katherine Goddard, who I'll introduce to you through a couple of her documents. So in addition to holding the Baltimore post office for 14 formative years during the Revolutionary War and its aftermath, Mary Katherine Goddard was also the official printer of the Continental Congress during its residency in Baltimore in 1777. In this role, she was the first person to print the Declaration of Independence in full. Wow, right? That's cool. So it was an honor for any printer, and she remains, and she rose to the occasion. The Goddard broadside, which is here, would be distributed throughout the colonies, and remains one of the most important printed texts of that moment. And then you'll see audaciously, so this is the Goddard broadside here, and you can see down at the very bottom, below the list of all of the signatories, she actually includes her own name. So I've got it kind of zoomed in up here. So this is the woman who signed the Declaration, putting her own name, Mary Katherine Goddard, on that document. In addition to printing the Declaration, she also printed all of the news that was coming out of the Continental Congress at this moment. She did it both in newspapers and pamphlets, so she was keeping her local community very informed and also making sure that people outside of Baltimore, the seat of government at that moment, would know what was going on. So she served a very important role. So I think one way that I've been thinking about this, she might not exactly have been in the room where it happened, but she was running the print shop right next door. So 2 years after printing the Declaration, she received this official appointment to the Baltimore Post Office from the Continental Congress. So in Revolutionary Networks, Joe Edelman identifies Mary Katherine Goddard as one of a few women whose family connections provided a window of opportunity in which they could assert themselves in public as commercial and political actors. Edelman writes that she is one of about 15 women who also became either printers or proprietors of printing offices during the Revolutionary era. Her family connections were really integral to her appointment. Her brother William, who I think we have an array of texts that are attributed to him on the table in front of us, and really having a printer brother who was also serving an important role for the Revolutionary era Post helped her get this position. So folks might have heard of her brother William, who is often given credit with establishing the constitutional mail, so the Revolutionary era independent postal service that was developed to kind of break free from British censorship and surveillance during the lead up to the war. And it was actually his departure to travel on Franklin's request to organize this postal system that opened up both the editorship of the Maryland Journal that had been printed under his name, as well as the post office in Baltimore. So really, it was kind of his role first, and then kind of got handed over to her as a capable sister, who then ultimately gets her own appointment. And I really like this document. I think it kind of speaks to the Revolutionary era postal system that really did make room for Goddard. And one of the things that I like about this document especially is the pronoun blank. So if you look here, so at the second to last line, there is a place to add either she or he, or they shall from time to time receive from me. So there's actually a little bit of room for the possibility of women, even in this very form. But I will also add, I think just 2 lines above it, there's a he. So I think that also kind of speaks to the default. I mean, it was still expected that a postmaster would be a man, but I think this form kind of shows how it was adaptable, how there was room. I also like on this one where the postmaster is struck out and she is officially the postmistress. That is her appointment. And it's a title that she embraced. So I love this commission. She kept a hold of it her entire life, gave it to her nephew, and then it ended up at the Rhode Island Historical Society there. So it was an important document to her, even though she wouldn't work for the postal system for the last years of her life. So while the colonial and revolutionary model held room for women like Goddard, the early National Post Office Department did not. Rosemary Zagari identifies Goddard by name and her dismissal from the Baltimore Post Office as part of the revolutionary backlash in the early national era, in which women, who might have found a place in public life of the colonies through connections or good luck, were more formally excluded from the polity. She writes, and this is Zagari, typically this period is understood as a time of democratization, of increasing political opportunities and openness in the political system. Yet, while political changes since the American Revolution had continued to create new possibilities for white men, there were closing down of certain opportunities for white women. Some of these changes were deliberate, others were incidental byproducts of larger structural or institutional changes in politics, culture, or society. Nonetheless, they all tended to produce the same unfortunate results: the marginalization of women in electoral politics and the more explicit exclusion of women from the government. So Mary Katherine Goddard's 1789 termination came at a transitional moment in the American postal system. She was fired as part of the installation of the United States Post Office Department, the new large-scale bureaucratic system designed to incorporate every village, town, and city in the country. In the 14 years before, Goddard worked for the colonial and the Revolutionary era postal systems, in which postmasterships were often handed out to local printers. One postal system facilitated her career, and the other prohibited it. So the book chapter revives the full circumstances of Goddard's dismissal and introduces new information. She's someone who scholars do know about. She shows up in Rosemary Zagari's book and other Joe Edelman's book as well. So she's a figure who is important to early Americanists. But there has been some missing information. So I found newspaper journalism that she wrote to kind of stoke interest in her story and to get kind of the public to weigh in, as well as the full Senate petition, which I'm going to show spend a lot of time with for the rest of this talk. So this chapter revives the full circumstances of her multifaceted textual campaign, which ultimately reveals Goddard's savvy as a rhetorician, well equipped to write for a broad range of audiences and contexts. So I'll just give you kind of a brief summary of the four, because this document that I'm going to show you, the Senate petition, is really kind of the end of the story. It's kind of the last chapter. So the day she learns of her supersession in office, that's the term that they don't say she was fired or dismissed. It's a supersession in office. She organizes a petition signed by 253 men in Baltimore, each attesting to her paramount preference for her employment. And by the end of that day, it's the day she got the news, she sends a copy to Postmaster General Samuel Osgood, as well as another copy to his assistant. So I can only imagine the amount of work it would take to get 250 signatures, and no one's better situated to do that than the town postmistress. So she also writes newspaper articles actually the very next day after she's fired. She sends some journalism off to Philly, telling a much more sensational version of her story, drumming up the support of Philadelphians. And she lived in Philly for a very little bit, by crafting a story of villains and victims. So in her journalism, she describes herself as an enemy in petticoats. And gender really plays a substantial role in the newspaper journalism, but the Senate petition, as you'll see, kind of shows up in a slightly different way. So she also writes letters to powerful officials in the new government. She writes to President George Washington and Maryland Governor John Eager Howard. Washington responds to her letter and then forwards her notes to the Postmaster General. Doesn't really do anything. And Howard, the governor of Maryland, writes a letter of his own support for Goddard's reinstatement. So for months after that, she writes about her case in far-ranging media and continues to address the Postmaster Samuel Osgood directly and to encourage her supporters to write him letters on her behalf. Though Osgood read each of these letters, and we know that from the letter books of the Postmaster General that I kind of mentioned at the outset, and he even sends postal officials to Baltimore to spy on her, he did not write her back during this period at all. It isn't until May of the next year where he actually sends her an official note. So even the means of her dismissal was actually handled with an extreme lack of communication. So she was notified of this supersession in office when her replacement delivers a handwritten note that says to just hand over the mailbag, hand over the portmanteau and the lock and the key. He demands the books. And she has no means to question the postal official's decision, even though the assistant postmaster general came to town to fire. So he avoids seeing her and kind of is spectacularly evasive, kind of leaving from house to house to just kind of not be able to have this face-to-face conversation with her. So Goddard, kind of throughout this period, interprets this extreme lack of communication with her as a principled problem for the new democracy. Her writing speaks truth to a spectacularly evasive patriarchal power, and she doesn't hide her anger and contempt for the burgeoning misogyny in the post office department while she's doing it. So today I'll kind of pick up on some of those threads when we're looking at the document, but I'm going to fast forward to the end of the story, to Goddard's Senate petition file, a document that she compiled and prepared herself. She presents the case for her reinstatement to the Senate twice, and a similar petition arguing for financial compensation from the House, also twice. Though she would never work for the postal system again, Mary Katherine Goddard made sure her version of the story and the discrimination she faced would be preserved in federal archives. In her second petition attempt to the Senate, she submits what has been described as the most extensively documented petition attempt at the early Congress, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. Let me see if I can. Just going to change screens here. All right, and this is Goddard's petition, the first page. And it includes, oh, I guess I had one more slide. It includes three separate sheets of oversized letter paper, and they each contain kind of among them 5 different texts that are supporting her case for her reinstatement. So this first page here is the representation, so kind of the first most formal and legalistic account of her dismissal. Let me see. All right, here we go. Let's see if I can zoom in on this a little. All right, so this is the beginning of the representation. All right, so in this, Goddard gives an account of her financial investment in the Baltimore post office. And she argues that it warrants her continued employment there. In short, she makes the case that she is entitled to the job because the US Post Office Department owes her money. For 14 years, her 14-year career spanned the Revolutionary War and its aftermath, when financial support from the emergent new government was piecemeal and far from guaranteed. She had to be resourceful to keep the mail running during the war, and she used her own personal financial resources to maintain the vital flow of information. So she writes here, let me see if we can zoom in even a little bit more. All right, there we go. So you can see here, she writes, the income of office was inadequate to its disbursements. She was obliged to advance hard money to defray the charges of postwriters for several years. The whole of her labors and industry was necessarily unrewarded. So here we really see her kind of making an economic argument. And let me see if I can move to the bottom of the next page. And then this schedule at the end of the document also supports that. So she provides the receipts. So she knows exactly how much the US Post Office Department owes her, and she submits that to them as part of the representation as well. So go back to the text here. So in addition to making the economic case that she is entitled to the post office, she also emphasizes the extreme lack of communication on the part of the Postmaster General and his assistant, and frames it as a violation of the rights of the people of Baltimore. She continues to present a case in which the people do not have the power to choose their elected officials in the post office, and thereby frames her dismissal as a crisis of democracy. In highlighting the silence of the Postmaster General, she draws attention to the dysfunctional democratic protocols in which the people really do not have power. So here she's describing that scene of her dismissal that I described. She's talking about Assistant Postmaster Charles Burrell. He comes to town while he was at Baltimore. Although he remained several days in town, yet he did not think it proper to indulge her with a personal interview, whereby she might learn of the cause of her removal or to what motives it could possibly be ascribed. And then she continues. So she emphasizes the extreme lack of communication at the scene of her dismissal. And then it continues. She writes about the sundry public and private applications prior to the 19th of November that were made to the above gentlemen. So people are just writing and they're getting no word back from the postal officials. And then she goes on, this line I just like quite a bit. It kind of resonates on the human level. And she talks about the personal effects, the effects on her mental health, really, as we would describe it, in this extreme lack of communication. And she writes about the long passage of time, delaying a determination of her fate, has greatly augmented her anxiety and distress. These are but poor rewards indeed for 14 years of faithful services. So she kind of continues to comment a little bit on the expectation that other deputy postmasters would maintain their appointments in the new government, and kind of describes that here. And then the last thing that she includes here, there was one like very flimsy excuse, kind of the rationale for her dismissal, that was made on the spot by the assistant postmaster to a friend of hers. So he never actually speaks to her while she's in Baltimore, but the assistant postmaster general does speak to some of her acquaintances who are able to kind of get this one piece of information in which they say that the deputy of Baltimore will thereafter be obliged to ride and regulate to the offices of the southward. But that, with great deference to the Postmaster General, will be found altogether impractical because the business of the office will require his constant attendance. So even in this moment, she's kind of replying to that one kind of flimsy excuse that this job required more travel. The one time it's written down by postal officials, it says than a woman could undertake. She's kind of replying to that here just by turning to the nature of postal work, in which the deputy postmasters like famously couldn't be, they had to be open, they had to be accessible, they had to, kind of be available to the public. So traveling for work would actually mean that the post office in Baltimore could be open. So she kind of brings that up here. So let me see if I can get back to my script here. So in all, in this representation, the first part of this document that is, and here, just to give you a little bit more of her language, because she's such a good writer, and I think she's such a compelling figure that comes across in this. She writes, now to deprive her of this office, to which she has a more meritorious and just claim than any other person, is a circumstance pregnant with that species of aggravation, which a sense of and a sense of ingratitude that inspires, and the sense of ingratitude inspires, and which is much easier felt than described. So in this, I'm kind of looking at the gendered language in this in the book and kind of thinking through, she's not really speaking necessarily fully from a gendered place, but we do kind of get these moments where she's talking about being pregnant with aggravation, and that this is easier felt than described. She's kind of coming up against some limits of language to really kind of speak to this injustice. So that's how we see her closing out this representation, as well as with this schedule of monies, this chart that actually really wonderfully has the scale of depreciation for Baltimore currency. So she wanted to get paid back in the buying power, which I think is important. So so that's the first of 3 pages. And then this is the second. So this is the representation of the merchants of Baltimore. So I had mentioned that document that was signed by the 253 men that she coordinated and put together. She includes a copy of that in the petition file. And that list, or that document, it's just really wonderful. Get us there. As you can also see here, it includes the full list of signatories. She makes sure all of that information is included. All right, there we go. So Goddard next includes a letter written by the collective inhabitants of Baltimore. So that's like an important phrase. It's signed by the inhabitants of Baltimore. And it's signed by 253 men who attest to her good service. Each signatory affirms their paramount preference for her employment. They believed her singular track record of maintaining Baltimore's communication during the Revolutionary War entitled her to the job. No one knew Baltimore like Mary Katherine Goddard. The signatories ranked from wealthy and influential merchants to the chair of the Baltimore Medical Society to working class printers, clerks, and farmers. And there's a lot of like small scale merchants who show up here as well. The governor of Maryland and the French consul to the United States likewise add their name to this document. Though Goddard did not sign the letter herself, it is almost certainly the work of her concerted action alongside and in tandem with the inhabitants of Baltimore who came to her aid as signatories and referees. So the letter itself is pretty brief. It's this one page. It's 3 paragraphs long and is followed by a long list of names. It formally draws on Revolutionary era genres, practices, and networks in which civic rhetoric flourished. It's a collective letter. As communications historian William Beatty Warner describes, the cause of liberty bound its adherents into groups, obliged them to consult with others before they acted, and carried an ethical imperative to shape individual actions. So they supported the public virtue of the cause. These groups authored texts in a collective voice, drawing their power from the democratic deliberation taking place alongside the authorship of texts. Drawing on this revolutionary rhetoric as a city in democratic consensus, the inhabitants of Baltimore addressed the Postmaster General. So this is the first paragraph that we can see here. The late change in the Department of Deputy Postmaster in this town by the removal of Miss M.K. Goddard and appointment of Mr. John White in her place, being a circumstance that gives us much concern. We will excuse the freedom we take by troubling you on the present occasion. Our knowledge of the propriety and rectitude of the lady's conduct for many years past, while acting in the department, added to a love of justice and a duty we owe a worthy fellow citizen, induces us to interfere in her behalf. Nor should we have delayed our application to this late a period had we not supposed that the laudable example of our illustrious president would have been followed by continuing the deserving in such offices as they had held previous to the adoption of the new Constitution. So the letter is pervaded with democratic principles. It's written from a collective voice from a wide-ranging group of men living in Baltimore. The collective letter establishes her reinstatement as an act of justice according to the local public consensus. Perhaps most importantly, Mary Katherine Goddard's fellow Baltimoreans described her as a worthy fellow citizen, an authorized and recognized member of the national community worthy of rights. For these Baltimoreans, Mary Katherine Goddard's gender is not antithetical to her citizenship. In fact, her gender is marked at multiple points in this first paragraph: Miss, her, lady, and she is nevertheless described as a fellow citizen to this long list of men. While the letter first calls upon the Postmaster General to reverse Goddard's dismissal outright, it also offers a concession by proposing an alternative employment arrangement that would accommodate both Postmaster White and Postmistress Goddard in Baltimore. Ceding the higher authority to White, Goddard's friends suggest that she might serve as the assistant in the office. If, as postal officials suggest, the job demands travel, why not employ the worthy and capable Goddard to oversee the office while he's away? They write, we think and submit to you whether there is not an equal propriety in employing an assistant in such business as to leave one in the management of the important business that must occur in the office here during absence. By the end of the letter, the merchants of Baltimore made a direct request to employ the public official of their choice and opened up space for a collaborative resolution of the employment controversy in which the people of Baltimore, their postal officials, and the administration of the post office department might all be adequately served by the personnel in the Baltimore office. So here's the long list of names. And a special thank you to Taylor Galusha and Katie Galusha for helping me research all of these names in Ancestry.com to see what all of these folks were up to. Still a little bit more work to do on that, but it's really cool to have the full list of signatories there. So moving on to the next, this is the final page of her petition. And she includes Mr. Osgood, Postmaster Osgood's response back to, remember, it was signed by the inhabitants of Baltimore. And this is his letter. So Goddard next includes Postmaster General Osgood's response, written a full 2 months after a full 2 months of silence, though he was communicating about the matter with other people during that time. So Postmaster Osgood replies to the letter of the inhabitants of Baltimore, or rather, he responds to one of the men, singling out Richard Curson, one of the wealthiest signatories on Goddard's list, as the sole addressee for this response. So it's addressed to Sir there, and in her copy, she kind of adds Richard Curson down here. His letter asks Curson to convey the content of this message to the rest of the signatories, but the letter is addressed to him alone. As a response to a collective public letter, Osgood's missive to Curson reads as a gesture of cronyism. By keeping the issue between two gentlemen, the Postmaster General hopes to mitigate the public unrest elicited by Goddard's dismissal. The content of Postmaster General Osgood's letter is an exercise in gendered exclusion, delivered through not so subtle clues rather than overt statements. Though the initial letter was signed by the inhabitants of Baltimore, Osgood reinterpolates them here as the gentlemen of Baltimore. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more. So he writes back to Curson and addresses the gentlemen of Baltimore. The opening paragraph establishes the interested parties as a community of gentlemen. So he writes, I have received from the gentlemen of Baltimore a very respectable representation in behalf of Mrs. Goddard, who lately had the care of the post office at that place. I have to apologize to them for delaying the answer so long, and to you, sir, for your trouble. I must give you in communicating the same to the gentlemen who have interested themselves in this matter. The polite manner in which they have been pleased to communicate their sentiments demand my sincerest acknowledgments. Like 230 years old, but the bullshit is still strong. You can smell it. So the prominence of gendered language in the opening paragraph, along with the celebration of gentlemanly civility, makes clear that Goddard, the self-described enemy in petticoats, has no place in their masculine discourse. The letter continues by praising the honorable and just views of the gentlemen of Baltimore and states that it would afford me singular pleasure if my conduct might meet with their approbation. While seemingly innocuous, or maybe even just obnoxious, these sentences establish a tone of gentlemanly civility that forecloses consensus before introducing the matter at hand. The Postmaster General does not demand fealty from Baltimore, but rather coaxes their assent through the language of civility. Before commenting on Goddard's postal appointment, he establishes the masculine bounds of public discourse and public office, and thereby sets the stage for Goddard's gender-based exclusion. When Postmaster General Osgood finally addresses Goddard's dismissal, he relies on the official language of the law to justify his power to appoint the deputy postmaster in Baltimore. Though the opening paragraph of the letter is all gentlemanliness and gender, when he speaks of the problematic postmistress, Osgood relies on the rule book to justify his choice. So he explains, I think it's here. The Postmaster General is by the ordinance of Congress made accountable for the conduct of his deputies. This responsibility is a matter of very serious consequence to him. In all just cases, there seems to be a peculiar propriety in permitting the officer to exercise his own judgment freely. From mature consideration, I am fully convinced that I should be more benefited from the services of Mr. White than I could be from those of Mrs. Goddard. Though he does not comment on Goddard's gender here, masculinity is baked into the basic descriptions of the post office department. He's kind of speaking in the third person, kind of in a shift here. The Postmaster General is overtly associated with masculine pronouns, delimiting the role of men through the basic grammar of his explanation. Osgood's use of male pronouns in the letter aligns with the language of the ordinance of Congress he cites within it, and relies on the basic masculinist grammar of the Constitutional Convention to imply his point for him. And if the masculinity mandate of the US Post Office Department was not made clear by Osgood's subtle grammatical cues, the first sentence of the following paragraph that I've highlighted here would leave no question to the gendered terms of Mr. White's appointment. In closing, Osgood writes, "I am happy to find that the gentlemen of Baltimore consider Mr. White in the same light that I do, as a gentleman and a man of abilities and integrity." So in 2 words, it is White's status as a gentleman and a man that best qualifies him for the Baltimore postmastership, with his actual capacity and qualifications coming in 3rd and 4th in Osgood's distilled list of Mr. White's best qualifications. Osgood continues to describe the approbation and recommendation White has received from the first characters in the state of Maryland, and expresses his confidence that White will oblige and accommodate the citizens of Baltimore, manifested by the strictest attention to punctuality in the duties of his office. In his final paragraph, Postmaster General Osgood forecloses any dissent from the people of Baltimore by asserting their approval for White's appointment. Beyond the gendered content of Osgood's letter to Curson, it is also important to take note of what he omits. The Postmaster General refuses to engage with the substance of the letter from the inhabitants of Baltimore, that Goddard was their preferred public servant, and they believe Osgood made a mistake in his appointment of Mr. White, the out-of-towner with absolutely 0 postal experience. Nor does he address Goddard's more thorough articulation of her economic investment, her proven work history, and the public approval of the people she was appointed to serve. Instead, Osgood refuses to address her directly by letter, and even in his response to Curson and her gentleman supporters, he refuses to engage the substance of her argument. For Postmaster General Osgood, postmistresses had no place in the United States Post Office Department. By sidestepping the substance of her argument, and by promoting a culture of gentlemanly civility, Postmaster General Osgood made clear that there was no place for women in the new national government. Instead, women like Mary Katherine Goddard were to be economically exploited, and their labor would not be measured or accounted for in the new postal system. And I talk a little bit more about just how prominent it was for wives of postmasters to actually just run the shop. So that is kind of another piece that kind of will be further fleshed out in the book, but I'm skipping over here. So moreover, in hailing the inhabitants of Baltimore as gentlemen, and by addressing the most powerful among them, Osgood's letter to Curson implies that men should close ranks around Goddard, to put aside their differences of politics and lean into their unifying maleness to delimit the realm of political exclusion. But that's not the last document. So, and I think it's important to just remember that Goddard submitted all of these things herself. So she copied down this letter to include it in the petition file. And she includes Osgood's response for a reason as well. But we get this other kind of final last delicious document, which is Mary Katherine Goddard's observations on this letter from Osgood. So this is just me kind of riffing on it a little bit. So when Mary Katherine Goddard read the Postmaster General's letter to Curson, it must have made her stomach turn. To have proved her mettle and to have worked so hard and at such a cost, only to be pushed out the door by men who had no idea what they were doing. Like John White, the new postmaster of Baltimore, Postmaster General Samuel Osgood had absolutely no postal experience before this. And important piece of information, he was awarded the job, the Postmaster General of the United States, after Osgood gives President George Washington his New York City mansion to use as a presidential residence during its time in New York City. So that is the moment he gets the Postmaster Generalship. Osgood's tone and the niceties would have appeared to Goddard for what they were, gestures of cronyism well attuned to mitigate dissent. We see men colluding with one another to take up all the power in the room. The particulars of the blow aside, it was the heart of the matter that really seemed to wound Goddard the most. Despite her capacity or her capability and years of service to the revolutionary project, she was no longer the Postmistress of Baltimore. Had she not played her part in building the nation they were now excluding her from? Had the revolution not been for her too? Osgood's letter to Curson motivated the final record included in Goddard's petition file, the observations on the above letter. which is a paragraph by paragraph repudiation of Osgood's claims in his letter. While the representation is formal, professional, legalistic, and designed to work with Congress, Goddard's supplementary observations carve out more space for her criticism and outrage. The observation begins. Mr. Osgood professes to be sensibly struck with the honorable and just motives of those who interested themselves in behalf of Miss Goddard. And yet strange, he took 8 weeks and upwards to answer their letter. She continues, Congress, and this is, each one kind of goes back to a paragraph in the above document. Congress, he says, has made him responsible for the conduct of his deputies in office, and therefore it becomes a serious matter to him who he should employ. He therefore discharges one who had 14 years experience in the business, paid off all accounts with the most rigid punctuality, and gave universal satisfaction to the community who have on their part, from a principle of gratitude, joined in offering any security, which is money, for her conduct in office, and praying in the most earnest manner that she might be restored. This he refuses and employs a man who never had a day's previous knowledge of the duties he undertakes, and who appears to be equally unknown and obnoxious to the people, testified by their signing a request to have him removed. So you can see that. It's right here, yeah. I'll just read that last line again. This he refuses and employs a man who never had a day's previous knowledge of the duties he undertakes, and who appears to be equally unknown and obnoxious to the people, testified by their signing a request to have him. And I'll just kind of hit up a couple of other high points. It's just a wonderful record here. So I'm jumping to this highlighted paragraph. Mr. Osgood says he thinks Mr. White can be more useful to him. So he may, but not as deputy postmaster, because it is evident that he will require the experience of some considerable time in any business to know it as well as those who have conducted it for a great number of years. This last paragraph here, I'll just give a part of it. He says, the gentlemen of Baltimore consider Mr. White as a gentleman of ability and integrity. Mr. Osgood may probably find it a very difficult matter to prove that there is a gentleman in Baltimore who has not signed his name to one or other of the 2 lists delivered to him and his deputy requesting that he should be removed. And in this instance, the citizens of no town upon the continent were ever known to be more unanimous. And then this last paragraph here, it is true the governor, John Eager Howard, the council, the French council, and other respectable gentlemen at Annapolis wrote in favor of Mr. White, but not to Mr. Osgood to take her office from Miss Goddard. On the contrary, the governor wrote to Mr. Osgood, fearing that from mistake, prejudice, underlined, or misrepresentation, he should prefer that any other person to that which she alone appeared to have the best right to enjoy. Let Mr. Osgood show this letter, and it will speak for itself. And that's the end of her file. So in her observation, in this final document, Goddard opens up for herself a new register to comment on this. We've seen her being very professional, and the newspaper journalism, we see her being very sensational. And this, we kind of see her being a little sarcastic. We see her contempt, we see her anger, and I think it's important in that way. So, and I talk a little bit in the book about the gendered language that shows up kind of throughout these documents, kind of how it's being kind of put into action in each text. But at the end of the day, all of this, Mary Katherine Goddard was still unheard. So though she presented her case for reinstatement to the Senate twice and petitions the House for restitution from the Post Office Department twice, the legislature refuses to engage with her argument. So though it's listed in as being read, as brought up in these meetings, and though she made her case at least 4 times, Congress never even warrants an outright rejection. They just simply leave her petition to be tabled. So they do not engage with her at all. In the process, all of these times petitioning the Senate and the House, she learned something about the archival protocols of the early Congress, that a copy of her petition would be preserved in the records of the Senate, where it is still housed today. So though Goddard would never be restored to her former post, She must have drawn some satisfaction knowing that from the knowledge that her side of the story was well crafted, meticulously documented, and safely archived in the records of the Senate, where the Postmaster General had no authority. We have a lot to learn from her. I think she's such a model. She experienced injustice, saw a crisis of democracy, spread the word, wrote it down, and made sure the story would endure beyond her life. And thanks to her efforts, we can better understand the ways in which the U.S. Post Office Department was a major engine in the unequal distribution of resources and political power in the early United States. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Christy. Fantastic. Zoomers back up. If you're on Zoom, please use the raise hand function if you'd like to pose a question or put one in the chat, and we'll read it out. And the floor is open. Liliana.
Thank you so much. You gave us a wonderful presentation of the documents that made Goddard almost into one. And in the course of it, we also learned something about the role of gender at that time and the nature of democracy. I would like to bring it back on the level of materials, because what we are doing is reading the document. What I think the push for is what are these documents? And it seems to me that we have two different systems. One is the postal office, or rather the postal system. You send a letter, it is circulating. It is circulating, and it gave us the precise specification, economics, you send money, or you connect people. The second system is what Goddard is doing. She is sending it to a goal, it has to go to another. It is not circulating. It is almost ironic that she was blamed for not traveling. Because her letters are not supposed to travel, they are supposed to go to the office. Now, it seems to me, if one can push a little bit further, what is the nature of it? If it is deposited, but not circulated, if it is supposed to serve democracy, but who the heck will read it once it is deposited? So I wonder whether you can say a little bit more about her alternative system of learning.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And I really appreciate your kind of description of kind of thinking about circulation and documents, kind of sitting still and that kind of being actually at odds in a really interesting way. So thank you. I think I still have a lot to learn about the archival protocols of the early Senate, because I'm not actually sure why they kept the documents or what the process would have been like for her to deposit it. But I do think I do think that she knew, just given that she had traveled to do this on other occasions. So I think I still kind of need to learn a little bit more about kind of the archival expectations of the Senate. But I don't think that they expected people to consult and read these. I don't think that I'm not exactly sure what they thought that they were doing, and maybe other folks in the room might be able to speak to that.
Old English right of petition, and then there's some Anglo protocol for practice of this that they are familiar with.
It must be, but I have looked at all of the many of the other petitions that came through, and I think the one thing that sets Goddard apart is that those are mostly like half a page long. They're very short, and they tend to just be, kind of the much more like the representation, like the first page. And I think what's exceptional in what she gives us is the compilation, the fact that she's kind of lining these documents up right next to one another. And I think it was not lost on her that the Osgood's letter was not addressed to the inhabitants of Baltimore. So please. Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Yes. Yeah,
Wayne.
message in a bottle kind of to the
Yeah,
future,
yeah.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
What, Wayne, please, yeah.
Must have been certain draft on the print, and that's what
Mhm.
you get fired, you know.
Right.
You know, draft and print.
Yeah.
And how long is it between for terminating and signing it?
This is I think it's about 6 months. I think it's about 6 months later. Yeah.
You know, it probably changed every time you practice it. That's how these kinds of.
Yes.
Great. Do you have any sense of her network?
I think I'm actually going to Baltimore just after this to kind of get into those weeds a little bit more, because I think a lot of the names of correspondents, a lot of the names on the list are people that we don't know much about in history. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to learn a little bit more about that. But your point about these kind of drafts being revised and written again is totally true, because most of the language from the representation was originally sent in a letter to George Washington to address the president. They're definitely not exactly the same, but there are chunks of it, you know, that are just word for word the same. You can tell where she really, you know, kind of has identified where she's made the point. And I do think, yeah, I want to spend a little bit more time with that, because so far as I've been writing, I've been kind of telling it as a chronological story. But I do think, yeah, I'm happy to be in this room to be thinking about the materiality and kind of what parts are repeated, what parts are drafted, and yeah, kind of who she's writing with.
So Giselle and then Jerry.
I was wondering what was they, you wrote back to only one gentleman who was supposed to be mentioned
among the wealthiest. Yes.
I was thinking about like the relationship with like wealthy man and Postal office all the time. So somehow addressing him, kind of expecting a favor of some sort, because she at one time had to cover those expenses. So that would be needed like a monetary.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I'm actually glad that you brought it up, because person does show up a little bit later when we're thinking about the Baltimore like post office, who's the postmaster of Baltimore. So interestingly, within the same year, John White, her successor, dies. And all that I can find from outside of the archive is that it was an untimely death. You know, yellow fever was going around, so it could have been other things, but like there's something going on there that I'm intrigued.
The trap door she put at under the office rug or something.
No, you could totally, yes, I have played that scene in my mind too. But interestingly, so the next appointee, so I have also thought about this. The guy dies. He could appoint Mary Katherine Goddard, you know, make everybody happy. He chooses Richard Curson's business partner, Alexander Furnival, to be the next postmaster of Baltimore. And it then entitles both Curson and Alexander Furnival as through the postmaster's franking privilege, free postage, which was an enormous benefit. So in this moment, this is before cheap postage, there was a Rhode Island congressman who calculated that the cost of sending a letter to the South, so like a very long distance from Rhode Island, would be the same as a day's wages for a worker. So it was very expensive to send private letters in this moment. So the franking privilege was actually like a very controversial benefit, because people knew that, yeah, it could be exploited, that it meant that even though postmasters often didn't get paid very well, they reaped enormous benefits for their businesses and kind of private, kind of ventures by way of the franking privilege.
And would you go so far, just to push your question a little further, would you go so far to say as, yes, there are 253 guys signing, but there's a network of other guys who want something else and are conspiring against? Yes, you would say that.
I think it stands to reason. I mean, sure. I think we can see, and I think a lot of even Richard John talks about the post office kind of as a spoils system, and it kind of being a reward. And the franking privilege was kind of the primary benefit, because a lot of these kind of wealthy businessmen who did have the postal appointments just really did not do any postal work, and they hired clerks and they hired other people to do the labor of the post office in their place. So there is like certainly such a disconnect between who is appointed to a postmastership and who is actually doing the labor of postal work, and that's where things actually get really interesting, I think, with the post office, because we both see kind of the postmaster as this like kind of fantasy, as a moderating figure. It was tended to be given to someone who didn't have overt partisan politics, but someone who, and actually in the 19th century, it was seen as being inappropriate for printers to be postmasters anymore. So after 1804, that standard set by Franklin that had been in place on the continent for 150 years, where the printer was the postmaster, really went out the door. And I still have a lot of thinking to do about that, but I think, yeah, I think there's a lot there, and kind of studying kind of whose labor is recognized and then whose labor is actually like kind of making the system function.
Jerry.
Thank you so much. I fear I may have missed things, but I wonder whether we can return to the materiality of the text.
Please.
We have been working with. So the petition that you showed us is the original petition with
Yes.
the actual signatures.
Yes.
The letter from us
Oh,
is
no, these are all copies. So
those
she
all
has,
copies.
yes,
These
she
all
has copies.
in her.
Yes.
And just wondering whether you have a sense of how the originals would have passed into her, especially the letter from Osgood.
Mhm.
And then her response, her observations, wonder who they are for, who she has shared them with, whether you think this is a unique copy, because one can't help but notice that she's running out of space at the bottom.
Right, right.
And I wonder what's going on with it. Because the whole thing is such a well-planned case, and she runs out of space, and the whole thing is so formally presented and
Yeah.
at the end.
Mhm.
The other question is, I think you said that you somehow make your way to Rhode Island.
No, just her postal appointment. So the paper from Richard Page.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So these documents are
These are in the archives of the Senate,
at the Senate.
where she left them. Yes. Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you think these are a one-off?
I'm sure she kept copies. I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine that she probably kept copies, given that she so her last petition to the House was in 1794. So that's kind of the one that's a little bit later. Everything else was taking place in 1790. So I would imagine even for her own records that she probably has copies of these things. I would love to know about how she got the letter from person. I think that's a question that I still have myself, because he didn't have to give it to her. It didn't have to, kind of arrive. And I don't even necessarily think that anyone else would have necessarily known, aside from person, if he had just, kind of kept a hold of it.
Mm.
So I think when I'm in Baltimore, I'm hoping to, kind of explore a little bit more to flesh out that network, because I think it's clear that these documents are circulating among friends, that they, and that this is a copy, and kind of a compilation of texts that kind of live on in different material forms. I think the page that we see that's the best prepared is the document at the very beginning, the representation, and even in it, so it's the one with the spreadsheet and it doesn't have the spacing issues in the same way. So even looking at this page, it's got her best handwriting. It's got, kind of the larger scale address at the top to the Honorable Senate of the United States. And at the bottom of this one, we don't see her running out of room in the same way that we do with her observations. So I do think, going back to Wayne's question, that we see this language of the representation showing up. So in her letter to George Washington, so she certainly did have that draft that also survives in George Washington's papers. That letter still exists. So
I was, sorry.
Yeah.
To channel Peter's style of dress, it does seem that things are folded in different ways.
Well,
And
They
And
are,
he would want to know what's folded in which manner and what that's.
Folded for sending, folded for archiving, folded for what,
Yeah.
when.
The petition itself is folded into little squares.
oh, that's good. Yeah. I think I had just assumed that they were all folded in the same way, but I do think I need to look at them a little bit more. And the interesting thing about this, and I'm sure everyone in the room knows this, archives don't always give you the full picture. So some of the pages that are here, like there's a missing cover page, even in the records that the Senate, kind of makes available. So I think I would like to see them in person to kind of address some of those questions. I was intrigued to find.
If you need a letter of support, we can probably get 253 signatories that you need to see that actual.
Yes, that sounds good. See if it works. Yeah, the one of the other letters that has a different life is the Osgood's letter. So the address to the gentleman of Baltimore also is in the letter books of the Postmaster General. And I was interested to see, does the verbiage change? Is anything, and it's all exactly the same. So I thought that was important. She copies word for word, and it's exactly the same in Osgood's hand in the letter books. Well, his clerk's hand in the letter books of the Postmaster General. But I want to think about the folding a little bit more, because I do think that it does matter, because the titles of each of these documents are written in her hands, and then some of them have an additional note on them in which the title actually changes in ways that I don't think that she necessarily would have approved of. So I want to spend a little bit more time thinking about the folding and the cover pages.
So let's get a comment from the chat from Lila, and then Lynn, and then.
So we have a comment and a question. So Mindy Bell from Intima Press Edition says, "Bravo, thanks so much for your research and talk, and for spelling MKG's middle name correctly. I touched upon this injustice in an essay along with a hand-set and printed letterpress recreation of the Goddard broadside in 2009, and then she gives a link, and I will email you the link. And then Marcy Dinius has a question."
You want to say your question, Marcy, or?
Yeah, I do. Thanks. It's great to see you and hear you, Christy, and to hear this project advancing. I was wondering, I guess this is my simple factual question. Do you know if any of the petition signers had anything to do with Benjamin Banneker? And I'll ask the longer question behind that, which is, or I guess the longer comment behind that, which is, it really strikes me that they're contemporaries and that they're in close proximity to each other. With Banneker also being in Baltimore County. But what really struck me as them having in common is not just the kind of 18th century rhetorical niceties, but and not so niceties through niceties, but also that they're making real claims for citizenship and for equal rights through showing their work. And specifically textually showing their work, right? So Banneker sending his almanac, his manuscript almanac along, and then Goddard providing literally all this documentation for her right to maintain this office that she's already shown herself, good at. So yeah, just that provocation to maybe think about whether they might have not come into orbit with each other, because I love thinking about those things. And then and whether or not, even if they didn't, it might be kind of interesting to motivate them together in that way. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and it's also really good to see you. So and I looked for Banneker on the list. He doesn't show up as a signatory, and maybe you know better than I do. The chair of the Baltimore Medical Society shows up on the list, so I don't know if that's one degree of separation to Banneker or not necessarily. But I think I want to think a little bit more too about. But I love that you're putting them in conversation in that way about showing work and the claims to citizenship. But I don't have a good answer, but I would like to know if there's like much overlap between the two of them, just given the arguments that they're making. So, thank you.
Yeah, Lynn, Mary,
Thanks so much, Christy. It's always fun to hear about this. I have a question about the other petitions she did, and are those extant as well, or is this the only one that you have come across?
This is the only one. And I think that's also going back to an earlier question about the archival protocols of the Senate. We do have the petitions of the Senate, but we don't have her petitions to
But
the
you
House.
know she did.
Yes,
petitions to
it's
the
logged
House.
into the minutes of the House 2 times.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you have the other petitions of the Senate as well?
Only the one.
Only
So
the
there's
one.
only this one record, which is
Okay.
dated from her second petition attempt. So I'm not
Okay.
sure if she just didn't leave anything at all the first time, or
Okay.
if possibly she left the first page, but it also has the date of her second petition attempt as well. So I think I was kind of maybe speculating and reading in between the lines a little bit that she might have even gone back the second time with better notes or something like that. But I'm not quite sure, because it seems like they should have kept it the first time if they kept it the second time, but there's only one record. But
Don't at some point, Jim might know, don't the stuff, isn't there, don't petitions start to get printed or like, never? Or do you not know? Okay, or the congressional record, I mean, I'm just
they are
thinking,
now. Yeah.
I'm just
you can
thinking
find
of
it now.
when these formalities
Yeah.
of
It's worth, yeah.
institutional documentation kind of get set.
But it's in the minutes, so there's
Yes.
notes in the minutes
Yes.
of both Congress and the
Yes.
Senate, but
Right.
not the full petition.
Right. Right.
If they, depending on what that was. So that's kind of interesting. Other quick question I had to do with, so she never recovered monies that she was owed. And that seems like a substantial amount of money
Yes.
that she was owed.
Right. And I think one of the other facts that I have left out of this too is that, so she was owed money by the post office, and a substantial amount. But at the end of her quarter, the Baltimore post office, she owed money back to the Postmaster General, and it was about, I think it was like close to 400 pounds. Like, it seems like it was a very sizable amount of money. And he writes back to her 3 times to try to get it from her, and I don't know that she necessarily gave it back. But her post office account book is at the Maryland Center for History and Culture, and I just am chomping at the bit to read it, because I would like to know if perhaps she compensated herself from the receipts that she had.
I mean, I think it's interesting that they didn't want to pay a woman back.
Mhm.
You know, it's like, maybe part of it is, you know, if we get rid of disappointment, we also get rid of
Yeah.
our obligation.
Right. And I do think, you know, even just reading the minutes in the House, I mean, they gave money to a lot of petitioners. You know, I think the people who are coming, you know, be ahead and after her, they do get money, you know, for different reasons, but hers, they don't even really respond to. So
What are those other petitioners then?
the one that's coming to mind is, and then I don't recall, I should look, I should look, because I do know that they, a lot of widows petitioned, and I do think that they, that they
Or
did, but that's a different kind of petition, you know, being a widow, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're another one.
I don't know. I don't even know what time it is. We're going. Keep on going.
So thanks for that. I'm not wrong. There were multiple, very high profile positions in our history served as postmasters, like Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
And in Lincoln's case, it's well documented because it was written about. That was a very complicated position. We had to really compete, and it was an elective process to get.
Oh, interesting. Oh, interesting.
That security question was a reliable person. Franklin's case as well, in his wife term, Philadelphia was known as someone trusted. So I might be wrong, but the duties of the postmaster, it was not only securing the circulation of documents, exchange between people. They were also printing documents and other materials, and in some cases, later in 1910, they would print. Why do you find that wrong? Currency was not printed in DC and carried to other places. They were offering print. Not wrong. That's part of my question. Also, they were because they were officially the printing press in that region. They also controlled the owners that that they served as official media of that region. Can it be also the reason why white men were trying hard to secure the position for one of their companies.
Yeah, I think, just a couple of thoughts. So the printer postmaster model, where it was like appropriate and thought to actually be for the public benefit for the postmaster to be a printer, ended in 1804. After that, Isaiah Thomas, who had been a postmaster for a big chunk of the 18th century, loses his job. And actually, Thomas Jefferson fires 400 printer postmasters all at once, which is in a way connected to the Maroon episode that's in the second chapter of the book. But it was no longer seen as appropriate for printers to be postmasters. But in the 18th century, in the time of Franklin, it was the nature of the design where the mail came in, and then it was the postmaster's job to print a broadside, share the news, and that's the model in which Mary Katherine Goddard really thrived. So I only shared a couple of her texts up here, but she printed almanacs as well. She printed newspapers. She printed broadsides. A lot of those same things that exist. So, and to her credit, 253 people in town thought that she did a good job at that model. But this is a moment where we really start to see a shift in the role of the press, where it actually was seen as inappropriate then for someone to be a printer after. But I think even into the 19th century, a postmastership was seen as a very important position, and it was a very desirable kind of job. I think Abraham Lincoln is a good example. John Brown was also a postmaster. So I think you can find there's no shortage of public figures from the 19th century whose first step into public life was a postmastership. And I think one of the other statistics that I have lodged into my brain, in 1835, when there were 5,600 postmasters throughout the United States, only 8 of those were women. So it was and those 8 were in rural areas where the letter books from the Postmaster General, they are actually really actively trying to find other people to take on that position. And one of the examples of a public figure, a woman who actually does get her foot in the door in the 19th century, is Amelia Bloomer. And we might know her name for her fashion association. So that bloomers are named after Amelia Bloomer, even though she did not invent pants. But she, as a postmistress, wore pants, and people actually used to come into her post office to see this spectacle. And then at the same time, in her post office in Ohio, she has a feminist reading room. So we do see a few moments where women are, kind of getting their foot in the door, and then, I think in the case of Amelia Bloomer, we see her making real change for other women at the same time. So, yeah.
I just remembered also, whose job was that among the local officials to collect the votes counted in that area, put them together, and send it to the capital? I think both postmaster.
I very imagine it could be. I'm not entirely sure. It's not like in the instructions to postmasters. So it's not kind of in their instructional jobs manual that I kind of lean on pretty heavily for this. But I would like to know the answer to that question too.
Money laundering.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
They can't even do fraud elections.
Yes. So
if there are small margins, they can at least, if they are keeping a report, not sending all the votes like most of the company. But if they're preparing a report and just writing something right to the draw, I mean, they can really shift very minor portion of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and I'm interested in knowing in terms of electoral politics. But one of the your question also made me think about just how frequent postal clerks and postal workers were the ones to steal money from the mail, take a banknote, and then just leave town, because it was actually, a clerk was a pretty low-paid job, but they were handling a lot of money. Right. So initially, the punishment for mail theft was death. So it was capital punishment, but they actually had to scale it back just because how common it was for the good clerks to steal the mail, and then it was no exactly. So there are a lot of clerks who had sticky fingers.
Okay, we've got Zach, we've got Philip, and one more in the back. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, thank
Get it
you.
on.
That was really interesting. So I had two questions. One is sort of like, why does she want the job so badly? Because it hasn't been very lucrative for her up to this point. So is it typically more lucrative, or as is very common in English petitions, particularly, you undervalue the job when you're making a petition, so it doesn't look like you're just in for the money. So, can we trust that list of debts? I mean, that's very common to just say this is cost me more than it's worth, at least in earlier periods.
Right.
And then I think that it's interesting, the connection with the printing trade and just the history of gender in the printing trade being a field that was more, at least in the early modern period in England, more open to women than some other trades, just because there's so much capital, fixed capital invested there that someone has to run. So like the very common situation that, her brother goes away and she takes over the plant. Right? So I also wonder if there's something in that's changing even, I think, print trade really is essential. There's something about the way professionalization enforces gender exclusion in a way that the household model of trades previously maybe, and also this this shift from the postmaster being printer, is that part of what's going on a little ahead of the time for her?
Yeah.
But that, that has maybe unintended, but has ramifications for the gender dynamic as well. If you're now saying, no, this trade, which still had more women involved than elected office or something. When you think about Lincoln, people like that running this trade.
Right. I think so to the first question, why did she want the job? Some of her records, explicitly say that this is a moment where the Baltimore post office was getting more profitable, and because she had lost so much money, she expected to be able to be recompensated, now that it was a lucrative office. So that's one reason, but I think there's a second reason that's informing it, and it's not lost on me that we're sitting in a room with a lot of texts that are printed purportedly by her brother. Even though the issues of the Pennsylvania Chronicle, I would almost certainly bet either her or her mother were the ones setting the type, because William was all over the place in this moment. But one of the things that happens only a few years before she loses her postmastership, before the 1789 event, is that William comes back from doing his service to Ben Franklin to setting up this constitutional post. And when he left, he had left her the publication, the editorship of the Maryland Journal, which had been printed under his name. And then after he leaves, she prints it under her name. And he demands the editorship back, and the sole editorship. The siblings actually never speak to each other again. And even there's actually a really heartbreaking letter from John Carter, who also apprenticed with the Goddard siblings' mother, Sarah Goddard, who is a printer in this moment as well, where he attended William's wedding and then is writing to Mary Katherine, and he has the list of all of the guests. He describes what folks are wearing. He even actually sends a piece of cake somehow along with that letter from the wedding to Mary Katherine, and says, I hope that you can reconcile, but it would seem that they don't, that they never do. So at one point, she was a newspaper editor and the Postmistress of Baltimore. Her brother wrests control of the Maryland Journal away from her. She's left with one foot in public life, and then it just gets pulled out from underneath her in 1789. So, I think she wanted the job because she really loved democracy. I think she loved the United States. I think that we do actually really see her committed to the ideals, and I think that money mattered. The kind of personal investment in kind of being an important person in your community mattered, but I think she was also just she was in it, kind of fully. So but she was 51 when she gets the postmistressship taken away, and then she lives into her 80s maybe. So she lives a long life, has a bookstore in Baltimore, and a print shop that I'm also hoping to learn a little bit more about, because I'm curious like what happened next. But because we don't see her printing in a newspaper, in those ways, we just don't. It's not as easy to access those materials.
Hopefully, printing some scurrilous broadsides.
Yes, yes.
Philip.
Thank you very much for this. Incidentally, I hope that
Yeah.
Yes, yes, can move.
I'm wondering, I don't know, is she someone who's never married?
Correct.
My experience of these women who end up God, they often inherit it. And I wonder does that affect the choice you make in the victim? Because again, when I see women, they're regularly saying, my children don't have it.
Right.
But is she making a choice when she's protecting? Because the petition, as I said, is very formulaic.
Mhm. Right.
Is she choosing a non-gender form of protest where other women might say,
Yes. So I think the simple answer is that she was unmarried her whole life. So I think that and she didn't have children. She didn't have dependents. So we don't see her making the case in that way. But I do think she intentionally was like arguing for her citizenship, even including that letter. So I think she didn't want to present herself as like a defenseless woman who needed help. She wanted to be somebody. She wanted to be in the room where it happens. So I think that like in part she's not she's not diminishing herself. She's not diminishing her power. So it is formulaic, but I also think that she's not she's protesting and not like begging in a way. So I think it's a fascinating case, because I do think it is different from other petitions from women in this moment in the ways that you've identified. But yes, her avenue into public life was because of her family connections, because her brother, but also she and her brother were both working with their mother as well, Sarah Updike Goddard, who was a printer, had her own fascinating and interesting career. So I think that their family connection still mattered, but it wasn't marriage that was kind of her avenue in. But
So final question, or can we get two questions in the back and then in front of you? Yeah. Yeah.
yes, it's only men. It's only men on the list, which I think, what difference would it have made, if she had included men and women on this document, and what a statement that would have been, kind of showing, taking all women's citizenship seriously rather than just her own. So I do think it matters that women aren't on this list, but I'm still thinking about like what to do with that fact. Yeah, I think in a way it wouldn't have carried the same kind of weight, but it also would have been a different kind of document. And I think, yeah, I wish she had, but
Yeah. Please, yeah.
Thank you. It's fascinating talk. The logic of the petition is a little odd. That it must have, and I'm seeing that the status of the position is what must have really mattered to her, because she couldn't simply petition for the money. It doesn't quite make sense to say, here are all of the things that I'm owed, therefore give me the job. She could have said, here's all that I'm owed, you've now fired me,
Yeah.
reimburse me.
Yeah.
Right.
And what she's asking for from the Senate or the House or whatever is something that is not in their power to give to us, that is the only one who has that power. So it seems to me that she may have gone to the Senate because Osgood said that it was the Senate that gave him the authority to be in full charge of this. But then I'm still thinking that what were they supposed to do? Take that power away from him?
Right.
So there's, I mean, this was very carefully thought out. I mean, she
Mhm.
was very clever in how she was looking for allies and how she unfolded this whole thing and what she included in the petition. But I don't think the money was the main thing for her. She must have had enough resources of her own.
Right.
That it must have been the status.
I think both matter because she does say that all of her savings is gone, and I do think that that matters as a 51-year-old, in the 18th century, to know that you didn't have anything for your future. Yeah, she kind of mentions that, kind of, she has nothing for her future. So I do think she herself didn't have an enormous amount of resources, but I am, kind of interested a little bit more to kind of see the full receipts, because we see the receipts that she gives us here, but I'm interested to see what shows up in the post office account book. And I think, the question of, what she's asking of the Senate is a really good one. But I also, I only showed kind of a snippet of what's here. I think she just pulled out every stop. She wrote to George Washington, and her letter to Washington actually, she calls him the supreme superintendent of the post office department, and is like trying to give him more power, actually trying to give him more power so he could intervene in the affairs of the post office department. And I think that's one of the things that I'm finding is that the post office department was absolutely integral. If we're thinking about printing, potentially even, kind of electoral, kind of being the infrastructure for elections, if it is. And then it's, oh, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, I lost it.
Central, but it's, yeah.
So why wasn't asking somehow
For the staff.
get Osgood in front?
Right. And I think, and yes, I think that's the piece, is that there is no check on Osgood. No one does intervene. We don't see the president intervening. We don't see Congress intervening on it at any level. And it was, a cabinet level position. It was a very important post, and there wasn't really a lot of check on that power. So I think she's trying everything, but nothing is reaching, the kind of guy, Postmaster General on top.
So we are clearly, this story is just unfolding layer upon layer, and I think we could keep on going, but we're going to stop here for the formal presentation, and thank you so much.
Thank you.